Hi and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be undertaking something which I have thought about doing for many years, and that is a Ninja Turtles MOC. Now, I was a huge fan of the Ninja Turtles when I was a child, particularly of the 80s cartoon. But when LEGO finally came around to releasing Turtles sets, I was quite disappointed by the fact that they were really very much play sets and didn't look very good on display. And then we saw the new Mutant Mayhem movie the other day with my kids. So my inspiration went into overdrive and I decided that now was the right time for this. Now, I set myself quite a big undertaking with this one because I decided to do a 3-level MOC, with 2 levels being the sewer lair and the top level being a street level. And I wanted all of these 3 levels to be detachable with loads of detail. So without further ado, I'll show you how I got on. So I'm starting out with the base here, and I wanted to go with the kind of black frame that the T-Rex breakout set has. A lot of people use this style for custom builds, and I really like the way it frames the build at the end. So here you can see I'm using some colourful plates underneath what will be the base of the model, because you won't see those plates. And then I'm just putting in some black 1x bricks around the edges with some tiles on top. Next up, I needed to decide which kind of tile I wanted to use for the slime, whether it was going to be a translucent piece or whether it was going to be a solid colour. And I decided to go with a solid colour on the left. The translucent pieces, whilst they kind of work in some respects, I think it's going to be a cleaner look with the solid green. Now, I don't have enough of these to fill out this area just now, so I'm placing a bricklink order, and those will arrive before the end of the video. I then moved on to creating some of the brickwork for the ground layer here, and you can see that I'm sort of pulling parts out and putting them back in again in order to get something that I was satisfied with using the masonry bricks. And then after that was actually probably the most challenging part of the build. I wasn't really prepared for how challenging it was going to be, because I wanted to create a sort of sewer tunnel here, or a big pipe. And I started off by trying to attach the top half panels separately from the bricks, the curved bricks on the front, and in the end just went for this design, just a much more simple design, which then just will rest on some sloped pieces that you'll see in just a moment. So this took quite some time, even longer than you're actually seeing in the video here, mainly because of structural challenges and making sure that it was strong enough to hold together without gaps. But once I'd got that sorted, I was actually really happy with the outcome, and I decided that I did like the exposed studs on the front rather than tiling those over. So you can see I'm just adding in some slopes here in order to eliminate the gaps before moving on to some plate work that will be the ground level of the base. So I'm putting in some green tiling underneath this sort of grid piece, just to make it look like there's some slime underneath there as well. And then I'm moving on to some wall work. Now, I found this nice Mutants rule piece from one of the official sets, and then I wanted to incorporate this in, and you'll see that I spend quite a bit of time here making sure that the wall looks natural. It looked a bit too blocky at this point here, but just after I added the pipes. So you can see I added in some plates in order to get this to transition a little bit better into the light grey. I spent quite a bit of time on that. The pipes, I've just used the noodle pieces with some Technic pins inside, and then I've added in some of the sort of steering wheel parts, and then put a couple of like gauges on the wall there. So the idea is that that will run then consistently up onto the second level, and then up to the top level, so that it will connect throughout the build. I'll add a nice bit of continuity. I tiled over this level then, just leaving a couple of exposed studs so that you could then attach the base of the next level. I then decided that I wanted to add a staircase in order to give this lower level access, so I removed the archway on the right hand side and opened up some of the plates on the next level up in order to create a hole where the stairs then can come down. So I put in a couple of the angled plates in order to get the steps down to the actual staircase. This part hasn't turned out perfectly, but I think considering that it's quite difficult to see it anyway, I think you see enough of it for it to look pretty nice here. I then moved on to some greebling ideas, and a lot of this part is just sketching out really. So I originally started with these sort of exhaust pieces from vehicle builds, but I actually moved them to the right hand side in the end, but thinking that I would attach them to sort of air conditioning or the fan system here. So I think that actually came out pretty nice in the end. And now the next level up is actually going to be a full 16 by 32 stud, just like the base of this model. So I added in these arches that extend out a little bit in order to give it a bit more structural support. I then finished off this level the same way that I finished off the last level, with some tiles, and then I moved on to tiling over the whole of each level, starting with some sort of older slime looking olive green tiles on the right hand side, and then a sort of mismatch of the light grey, dark grey parts for the flooring on the ground level here. Added in a couple of toys and a pizza for Michelangelo to be munching on, which you'll see in a moment, and also just smoothed out a bit of the area underneath the staircase. I then moved on to the same thing for the next level, which I've left deliberately a bit more open so that we can have a few more details here, a few more props. And as I lay the tile work here, you can see that I've used deliberately some older pieces, some more sun-bleached pieces, as I have done in the walls of the build, just to add a bit of griminess to the scene. Now I know this isn't to everyone's tastes, but I quite like the patina of an older sun-bleached brick if used in the right way. I then added a bit of detail here in the form of a desk with some computers, a little cabinet, and some pizzas. I tried to get a bit off-grid with some of this in order just to break up some of the lines for the build. But there's really no denying that this is my favourite part of the building process. This is where the build really comes to life for me, especially once the figures start to come in, and we also start to get a bit of the colour pop off of the turtles themselves and all of the props. I also added in Michelangelo and Splinter to the bottom of the build here, and then I also realised that it wasn't very natural for them to be holding all of their weapons, considering that there are no enemies in the base. So I decided that they needed a sort of weapons rack somewhere, and I felt that this area here in the corner, that was quite empty otherwise, was a perfect place for it. I did also consider placing this above their desk, but felt that it would be very inaccessible for them to reach over the computers in order to get their weapons. So I went for this area here, and this is really where I love LEGO, because it was very easy to just rip apart the entire wall and put this in here. It's never too late to go back and open up a section to place a bit of detail in that you've realised that you've missed. I then finished this detail off with a spider on the empty wall behind the desk. So my bricklink order has arrived, and I'm now able to finish off the slime, starting with the tunnel here. It took me a little moment to get a design which would fit the pieces in low enough inside the tunnel, attaching them with a couple of headlight bricks at the back. I then used a couple of curved pieces to create the flow of slime out into the main river. And I then set to work on tiling over the whole river, starting with this sort of overflow area where the slime was flowing into. And I used one of the new sort of slime splat pieces to what I thought was quite good effect here, to make it look like the slime was sort of running into it. I decided to actually remove the olive green. It just felt like it would be a cleaner look with it totally lime green. So I then covered the whole area here with the lime green tiles, adding a little bit of detail in the form of some human waste there and a newspaper. It took a moment to get the tiles correct here, and I also thought that the jumper plates actually made it look a little bit like bubbles in the slime, so I quite like the look of that. I added a little eye just for a bit of interest, maybe there's a monster lurking in the slime, and it was then time to move on to the street level. So I started off with a tree here. I decided that I wanted to give the build a little bit of lift. This was going to be placed behind the Party Wagon on the top level, so I needed something to be quite tall here with not a lot of colour. I didn't want it to distract from the other parts of the build, but I wanted it to give a bit of lift behind, so to create a scene basically here. So the tree actually came together pretty quickly. I decided to move it onto a dark tan base just to give it a bit more of a dried up, derelict look to it. I then framed it with some curved 1x2 pieces and then placed it onto the main base here. I created a lamp post and a little wheelie bin here as well, just to give a bit more interest. And then I moved on and tiled the whole pavement area here. Now I toyed with a few ideas for the pipes on the lower levels to connect to on the top level here, but I decided to actually just keep it simple and connect it to fire hydrants, so I created a red one and a black one. All that was left then for the top level of the build was to create a little newspaper seller, so I just did a basic build here for that. And it was then time for the Party Wagon. So this took a number of hours to get right. I built a prototype model first, and if you're interested in seeing that, there's some images on my Instagram. I would have liked to have done this in a tan, really, with a dark green roof, but it was very difficult, if not impossible, to get hold of all the pieces, especially in the tan colour, and it turned out to be just a bit too expensive for it to be worth my while to use dark green. But actually, I think that the normal yellow and the normal green actually work really well for this, and it really helps to add colour pop and keep to the authenticity of the cartoon's roots. Getting the angle for the windscreen of the car was quite essential for me, and it felt important that it had the yellow frames of the original car. So I decided not to go with a stock LEGO windscreen and use something a bit different. So I actually used a classic hinged vehicle roof piece, which you'll see in just a moment, but that then actually rests on these sloped pieces and created a pretty perfect angle for it. It was also important to me that all 4 turtles could fit inside the Party Wagon, even if only one of them was going to be in it for the final display. So I used a couple of jumpers just to offset them from the walls to fit all of them in, but they do fit in here quite comfortably. I added a little steering wheel and a couple of these old classic switches in here as well. Maybe those are used for the guns, not quite sure, but you can use your imagination there. Now I'm using dark grey wheel arches here, I know, because again I had to wait for a bricklink order to show up, but don't worry, they'll soon be gone as well. Now I didn't do a lot of interior detail for this. I only added a couple of clips here for weapons on the walls. I probably could do some more here, including perhaps some type of gun for the doors that fold out, but I decided not to worry too much about that for this particular video or this build. It may be something that I revisit in the future. I'll see how I get on. So those little pieces on the side there will hold up the big spoiler that's on the top. And again, ignore the white doors, those are coming in the bricklink order. This whole back section came together relatively pain-free, which is more than can be said for the roof of the vehicle. I ended up doing quite a few different versions, tried a few different techniques for the roof, but settled on what you'll see in just a moment here, starting with the slopes on the front, which needed to come out just slightly in front of the windscreen. So you'll see the hinged roof parts going on in just a moment here. And then for the tiling on the top, it would have been nice to have found a way to do a proper turtle shell design like the actual car has. I tried using Nexonite shields, for example, but I couldn't really get anything that matched it that well. And considering that I didn't have those in green, I decided to just keep it simple with just 2x2 tiles for the majority of the roof. So you can see I had to pull apart the build a little bit here in order to move the jumpers back 1 stud. That was because the steering wheel was in the way of the windscreen, and I hadn't actually accounted for that in the prototype model. So you can now see that the roof is on, and sorry for not including the build part of the middle section there. It's just a couple of plates with a couple of slopes on it, and then I used a hinged piece to put the sloped grills on top. So those rounded pieces on the back there, I actually changed before the end, that they stuck out a little bit too much. And actually the original car doesn't have any overhang at the back at all, but I couldn't find a satisfactory way to do that in this scale. But you'll see how that turned out at the end. Now in my prototype, I didn't have anything on the side of the roof, and it looked very plain and flat, to be honest. So I added a couple of these snot pieces so that I could put some tiles on the side as well. And I think that that actually helped quite a lot to create a sort of turtle shell look to the whole roof. And I think all in all, I'm quite happy here. It's definitely more angular and square than the original car, but in this scale, I found that really, really hard to replicate. But I do think that the tiles on the side really helped me to get closer. So again here, just ignore the grey panels for now, those are coming. But the spoiler came together very quickly and is actually one of the parts of the build that I'm most happy with. So I'm now just adding the doors on the side here. These do fold out at a 90-degree angle, and I tried to recreate some of the shapes on the outside of those using the 1x1 tiles. I then finished off the front end using small dish pieces for the headlamps and a temporary olive-coloured round plate until a green one shows up in the post. I actually decided to leave this with the studs exposed. I thought that it gave a better look than anything that I seemed to be able to achieve using tiles. I also realised that I could reduce the gap slightly behind the windscreen and that I'd forgotten a little bit of detail from the roof here, so I removed some of the slopes and added in a little radar dish and the 2 red spotlights on the side of the car. I did attempt wing mirrors but felt that that was just one thing too many, and I reckon these last details really helped to complete the look. Well, I think that's it for this one. After about 25-30 hours of building, it is difficult to know when to call it a day, but I think I've now reached a point where I'm really happy with this. But I'd also love to hear any feedback you have, any improvements or suggestions for things that I could have done differently. Drop a comment below, share, like and subscribe to help the algorithm, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching and bye for now.
Thank you.